I think it was because my folks made me sleep out on the porch all winter in northeastern Oregon. I think that was it. Child neglect makes you strong. I don't know my brother. She thought maybe she should do that.
Was that he's going to visit his
She's right there.
Right there, there's two in the front.
This is so exciting.
Good night, the public library is now closed.
That doesn't mean we have to leave.
I don't know about the hat.
It's a pajama party.
Hello. You're all over the place, aren't you?
Well, you don't see me if you're here.
Okay, well, I don't need a microphone. Hi, Tanya.
Hi there, how
Nice
are
to
you?
see you.
Good to
Well,
see
it's
you
just
guys.
great to see everybody. Thank you so much for coming. In case you don't have the least idea who the hell I am, I'm Alan Sherman, one of the facilitators of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now. And I'm going to introduce to you Kevin Downing. Kevin was in my Ollie class last term, and he was promoting the idea that we should at least think about some of these geoengineering ideas that have been promoted. If you have paid any attention to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, you might realize that in the last one, they actually suggested that we should consider some of these geoengineering schemes to at least buy time, and that's what Kevin is going to talk about. And it's worth noting that when we're talking about geoengineering, the two ideas that are most talked about are, and Kevin will talk about these, are solar radiation management, which is what volcanoes do when they spew up all this crap into the atmosphere and start reflecting incoming solar radiation. And the other is carbon dioxide reduction, and that's what trees do. So the ideas that Kevin is going to talk about are ideas that are happening quite naturally, but there are some plans or thoughts about engineering some of these ideas. So without further ado, Kevin and his wife Virginia Ray, who traveled all the way from Wairika to be with us today. I'll leave it to Kevin and let's get started.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, I'm not a climate engineering expert of any kind. I'm actually a geologist, so I understand Earth processes, and I want to actually introduce my presentation here to show you what has happened to the Earth in the past and how it actually manages to recover from high temperature situations and high carbon dioxide situations. Hopefully you all recognize this, present-day Earth, present-day continental situation. What I would like you to see is that the large blue areas are deep ocean, so they're actually ocean crust. They're not continental crust on which we can live. The light blue areas are shallow marine environments, so which are subject to becoming exposed to dry land if sea levels drop. So this is the present day situation. What I want to do is take you back to the beginning of the Upper Cretaceous. And this is a reconstruction of the globe at that time. You can recognize the continents, North America, South America, the South Atlantic just opening up between Africa here and South America. And one thing I want you to notice is how much shallow marine environment there is. There's the large oceanic areas of oceanic plates, but there are large areas of the continents which are covered in water. And the reason for that is that this was a period, the Cretaceous, the middle of the Cretaceous is about the last period, 90 million years ago, when there was no glacial, polar glacial caps on the planet. And basically all the water on the planet was in the oceans. And you can see how much land was missing. These are the Rockies, by the way, here. The Sierra Nevada and California haven't been scraped up onto the west side of the US at this stage. And you can see there's this shallow marine area on the east side of the Rockies. And so I'm just showing you that this is a time when carbon dioxide was about 2,000 parts per million, so about 4 or 5 times where we are today. And sea levels were a great deal higher. Now, you go from this time, 90 million years at the beginning of the Upper Cretaceous, to the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary. And this is basically the time when the last great extinction occurred, the removal of dinosaurs from the planet. Now, that was potentially a meteorite impact event. But what I want you to notice here is how much more land there is here at the KT boundary at 65 million years ago than there was at the beginning of the Upper Cretaceous. And the one reason for that is, you've probably all seen pictures of the White Cliffs of Dover. That is Cretaceous chalk. And the chalk extends from quite a ways north of London all the way through to Iran. And then there are shallow marine limestones around in the other parts of the world that were deposited during this time. And what the chalk is an uncountable number of skeletons from microscopic animals that developed calcium carbonate skeletons, and then the organisms died and fell to the bottom of the shallow marine seas and developed the chalk rocks. And basically, what the effect was of those organisms in the highly productive warm oceans is that they sucked up a great deal of carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere and sequestered it. So the Earth has been in a situation where there are high carbon dioxide concentrations before, and it has recovered from those situations. The trouble is that it took 30 million years. And we don't have that kind of time span to undo the damage that we've done since the Industrial Revolution. So what I want to talk about is the way that maybe we can accelerate some of the natural geological processes that go to moderate the climate. And this is just a graph that, there are models here, but the line I want to draw your attention to is this blue line, which is the million year filter of measured carbon dioxide concentrations. As you can see, there is a wide scattering of these data. It is not well constrained, but this is the best model of the line. And you can see this precipitous drop from the middle of the Cretaceous down to the KT boundary, where the carbon dioxide concentrations dropped from 2,000 down to under 1,000 parts per million. And it was the deposition of the chalk that was responsible for that drop. So when we look at the situation that we're in now, we think of ways that we can solve our problem. And the intensity of the problem, the difficulty of the problem we have in front of us. So this, you've probably seen graphs very much like this one in your discussions with this group. And these are the cumulative amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions being generated by man presently. And this is the cumulative total ever since the Industrial Revolution, basically. And it comes to just over 1,200 gigatons of extra carbon in the atmosphere, which is a massive problem. It's a really huge thing. If we turned off, in the US, Japan and Europe, if we could agree to turn off all our carbon burning power right now, we wouldn't even solve half the problem of how much we're generating. So why I am not saying, I am saying that we must do as much as we possibly can to preserve, to cut back on our addiction to carbon. But even if we turned everything off now, even if the whole world managed to, which we know it's not going to happen, we've still got a great problem that we have to solve. And unfortunately, the only way forward that I can see of doing this is to start contemplating engineering the climate, because we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to some catastrophe and say we've got to do it now when we haven't researched it. So when I first approached this subject with Alan, is I said, what I'm talking about is we need to research it, and we need to get the subject in the public forum where science is discussed, not cranky data, but the science of, and there are people researching these methods, but it's not around in the public forums. Nobody is discussing it. It's never mentioned by politicians. And I think it's unhealthy that we are not talking about this subject. So what I want to do is very briefly go through the possibilities that are out there. There are no silver bullets here. None of these techniques are going to solve our problem alone. It's going to be a combined effort of preservation and taking action. You've probably all seen this diagram of, most of this data that I'm going to show you here comes from a Royal Society report published in 2009 on geoengineering the climate. It's data that you can get the paper in PDF form straight off the internet. It's freely available information. So most of these drawings, pictures, illustrations came from that report. There is younger data that I've read, but most of this comes from the Royal Society. So we have incoming solar radiation, outgoing, which tends to be short wavelength, and outgoing longer wavelength radiation, which is where our problem lies, in that the carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxides that we've been kicking up into the atmosphere are starting to stop, and they have undone the balance between the incoming and the outgoing. And so there are two ways that we can think of, and what's happening is we're getting a net forcing of, and the estimates that I see are about 4 watts per square meter of excess heat coming in if you have about double the pre-industrial carbon dioxide levels. So if we're talking about 500 ppm carbon dioxide, you're looking at about 4 watts per square meter of excess radiation coming in, which results in more energy in our climate system, higher average global temperatures, and because there's more energy in the system, more energetic weather patterns, and so we get more violent storms and greater extremes, both hot and cold. So how do we right the balance? The best way, if we could do it, is to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide removal. There are various techniques that are suggested for that, and all of them, this is out of the Royal Society, all of them are described in these terms: effectiveness, affordability, timeliness, and safety. So this is land use and reforestation, afforestation. So, planting more trees. It's a no-brainer. It's a good thing to do. It's a very good way of sucking carbon dioxide back into the biosphere. An issue with it is that unfortunately those trees die and burn and put their saved carbon dioxide back up in the air again. So, it actually has limited potential, and this is low for the effectiveness, because of because of the cycle of trees. It's very cheap to deploy, just planting trees. Timeliness is that all CDR methods are not going to cool us down rapidly because of the inertia of the system. We could stop emitting carbon dioxide now, and we're still going to be getting warmer just because of the carbon dioxide that's already emitted. So none of these carbon dioxide removal techniques are going to have an instantaneous response, which is different from the solar radiation management techniques that I'll talk about later. And I need to move on through these pretty quickly. So with afforestation, the effectiveness is not very good. Affordability is pretty good, it's very high. It's not expensive to plant trees. Timeliness is medium because they do start to suck carbon dioxide straight away, but there is that lag time with the CDR method. And as far as environmental side effects, well, growing trees is a pretty good thing to do. So the safety is high. Then there's BECS, which is bioenergy with carbon sequestration. So it's basically growing forests, cutting them down, producing energy from those forests, and then sucking the carbon dioxide and burying it. And the various methods of doing that is you can do it chemically, or you can actually bury it, sequester it back down in the earth. And in fact, there are some projects around the world that, where they are, it's interesting because they are using bioenergy and they're taking the carbon dioxide from the BECS, from the biomass, and then what they're doing with the carbon dioxide is they're pumping it into old oil fields, and then they're extracting the oil from those old oil fields. Because all these techniques cost money. And one problem is getting rid of the carbon dioxide. Who wants a whole load of carbon dioxide? And there aren't that many takers. Oil companies are one of them. So there's a place where I think with these kinds of techniques, we have to get people that are that are concerned about the there are plenty of people that work in large corporations, and I've worked in mining companies. There are plenty of people in those situations who are actually quite concerned about what's going on. They're not just blanket rapers and pillagers. So, if you can make an environmental proposition that makes money, you're going to get a lot more support, from industry. And, the problem that we're in as humanity is in. At the moment, we've got people that are concerned about the environment, we've got the industrialists, and they're doing this. And I don't think we're going to get anywhere if we're doing this. I really think we've all got to try and get on the same page. But anyway, that's another problem. That's not what I'm talking about here. So BECS, biomass, the use of biomass is moderately effective because one problem is the amount of land that you can put towards the growing of fuels for the biomass business. So you'd have to cover a large area with these products, and you'll have competition for food growth. So you have issues with that. Then burying carbon dioxide is not particularly affordable if you don't get yourself aligned up with oil companies along the way. Timeliness, again, it's kind of slow, and safety is high. It's good because you're just taking the biomass and the carbon dioxide. You're not really having any other environmental side effects. Biochar is basically using charcoal and sequestering the carbon in charcoal. It's not as economic because you're not going to get any energy out of it. It's another possibility, but it's not. You see, it's kind of low in its potential. Moving along, enhanced weathering. So this is kind of what's happened in the Cretaceous when the chalk was deposited. The weathering of rocks uses carbon dioxide, and it is possible that we could accelerate weathering processes and use up considerable amounts of carbon dioxide in that process. A mineral that's very good at when you weather it in taking down carbon dioxide is olivine, which is a mineral in basalt. And we have in the West here large areas of basalt. But what you're talking about to do this project, this kind of project, are large mining operations, which are energy intensive and not particularly pretty. And then you've got to get rid of the wastes. I mean, you can wrap the carbon dioxide up and you can sequester it, but then you have large mounds of material, which are carbonate material. What you want to do with them. So this is probably one of the most effective, the most enhanced weathering is probably one of the most effective ways of getting rid of carbon dioxide, but it does have some fairly serious environmental side effects in the large mining operations that you're going to have to do. Energy intensive to do it, so you're going to have to produce energy to make these processes happen. So while this one has one of the better potentials of actually removing carbon dioxide, it also has some fairly significant side effects. But again, research is ongoing with all these processes and trying to see if it's possible to make them more effective and more efficient than what they are. Although with this, you're stuck with basic chemistry, and you can't change the chemistry of, 1 mole of silicate mineral goes with 1 mole of carbon, basically, and you can't get by that kind of problem. Carbon dioxide capture from ambient air is basically just like having big scrubbers, and you can put them anywhere you want in the world because you can catch from ambient air anywhere. It's pretty well averaged out all over the globe. So you can put these up in areas where you can then sequester the carbon dioxide underground, and you can also use it where you have stranded sources of energy, because again it's an energy intensive process. And when I say that, say like Alaskan North Slope oil fields still flare off the gas because they can't transport it out of there. And so you could set these kinds of operations off where energy is being wasted. You could do stuff like this in those places. Ocean fertilization, I think possibly a lot of us have heard of this, and it's quite good to report that from my reading it's not going to go anyplace. I don't think this method is going to work because the actual sequestration of carbon dioxide with ocean fertilization seems to be fairly poor. And so, and there's also, the safety of this technique is really extremely unknown, and we don't really want to start mucking about too much with the ocean systems when we don't know what we're doing. There has actually been some small-scale test areas of ocean fertilization, and they did manage to get quite a lot of carbon dioxide sucked up by the algae that they managed to get growing. But the sequestration, it did not all sink down. There's a thing in the ocean called the carbon compensation depth, and when the carbon gets down below that level, then it will not come back up. But most of the plankton that died actually respired, and the carbon dioxide was given back off again. So the ocean fertilization methods do not seem to be particularly good. But again, I think we still need to look at all these techniques and find out, and it's probably going to be a combination of using a bunch of them, not all just one, but using a bunch of techniques to try to remove the carbon dioxide that's already there. I mean, it's there, it's something we've got to deal with. We need to be doing this kind of technique, as well as cutting back and putting more carbon up there. So then we get to the solar radiation management side. This is not attacking the problem, the base problem we have. The base problem we have is the carbon dioxide that we've got to get rid of, the other greenhouse gases as well. What solar radiation management is doing is cutting down on the amount of radiation we're getting from the sun. We are not solving the underlying problem with this. But the thing about solar radiation management is that it appears that these techniques are going to be fairly rapid in their effect. So we could start deploying some of these techniques, and within a year or so, we could start getting some cooling from these techniques. And the one Alan mentioned earlier is the mimicking of volcanoes. And we know from the Mount Pinatubo eruption in 1991, when about 7 million tons of sulfur were ejected into the stratosphere by that volcano, we actually had an average cooling of about half a degree for a couple of years because of the aerosols that were kicked up into the stratosphere by Mount Pinatubo. And in fact, from the research that I've done recently, it still looks like aerosols, stratospheric aerosols, are probably the most likely candidate for getting us out of some immediate problems with a very rapid change of temperature. But there are disadvantages with all these. So let's go through them systematically. Surface albedo in human settlements. That's basically painting cities white. That's what that means. Painting cities white. And unfortunately, even though we think we've got some really large cities, it's a pretty small surface area. And the effectiveness of it is not very high. It's not going to reflect a great deal of solar radiation. But, and it's actually quite expensive to do, and you'd have to keep on doing it because the paint will run out. So anyway, but I don't think it's a bad idea. Cities have that heat effect with all the black tarmac and the concrete and everything around. They're hot places anyway, so other than everybody having to wear sunglasses, painting them white's probably not too bad an idea, but not particularly effective. Surface albedo of the desert, and this is a crazy idea. They're thinking of making an aluminium impregnated plastic sheeting and spreading it over deserts, just laying it out so that there's a lot more solar radiation reflected off of the deserts. And it doesn't seem to be a particularly popular idea. The safety is very low. The local environmental effects of that is that you're going to completely kill anything that was trying to grow in the desert. So it doesn't seem like a particularly great plan. Cloud albedo enhancement is an interesting idea. The idea is to spray sea salt, in fact, into the base of clouds, of tropical clouds, to enhance condensation nuclei, so that you get a much finer water droplets in the clouds, which increases the whiteness of the clouds, which would then reflect more solar radiation. It's an idea which I think has some merit and needs some research. As you'll see, most of these, all of these solar radiation management things do not do anything about ocean acidification. So nothing about that. What you're potentially going to get is considerable changes in weather patterns with the effects, and certainly seeding clouds, producing clouds. You're going to change weather effects, and most of these ideas, there are concerns about the strength of the South Asian and North American monsoon events and the precipitation that we get out of those. But again, research needs to be done on these subjects. The next ones, I think, are stratospheric aerosols and space-based methods. Both of these are basically the same thing, stopping using high level either in the atmosphere or in Earth orbit, or even the L1 Lagrange spot, which is the spot between the Earth and the Sun where the gravitational pull of the two bodies is the same, so that we could park basically a whole bunch of umbrellas up at that spot to try to stop about 2% of the sun's radiation hitting the planet. What we need with all of these techniques, solar radiation management techniques, is an easy way to turn them off if we don't like the side effects. Because we can model these and we can try them on small scales, and and slowly build up. But we know as humans on the planet before, we've tried to play with our environment, and we've managed to screw it up quite spectacularly at times. And this is the one that will really be bad if we really make a serious mistake. So one of the advantages of the stratospheric aerosol is that they're up there for about a year before you have to do it again, before you have to recharge. And so if you do it and it's there and you see a side effect you don't like, then you just stop doing it. Problem is there's a termination effect, because all of a sudden you take that umbrella away and all of a sudden you feel the heat again. So, none of these techniques should be done without a great deal of research and knowledge, and having the best brains on the planet agree that we've looked at this, and we've got to judge our risks. What are our risks for increasing temperatures? What are our risks from trying these major tinkering techniques on the planet? But I just want to finish with telling you that there's a guy called David Keith at Harvard University who has been pushing stratospheric aerosols for a few years. His idea is to, when we finally decide, okay, we've got to deploy this, that we should deploy at a rate that is going to reduce the temperature increase by half of what that year's worth of carbon dioxide, of greenhouse gas emissions, would cause it to go up. And so his model is for 2000, and if we started this in 2020, that in the first year